Urgent! A night that shocked everyone. Russia launches hundreds of Shaheds, but the sky over Ukraine turns into hell for the occupiers. One crew and an incredible result. Dozens of enemy drones destroyed in just 3 hours. A masterful job that impresses the world. But this is just the beginning. Fedorov is changing the course of the war. Sensation. Interceptor drones with remote brains are already in action. Operators control the battle from hundreds of kilometers away from the front and hit targets precisely. And it gets even louder. Real Shahed Hunters are now appearing in Ukraine. The latest Jedi drone. Radical changes in defense, the harsh mathematics of war, total control over losses, and a focus on robots. Drones, artificial intelligence, and unmanned technologies. Ukraine is moving to a new level of warfare. All the details, unique footage, and shocking facts are coming up in just a moment. Don't miss it. Greetings, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Solomia Dolik, and here are the latest events. A piece of news that literally takes your breath away. While Russia once again tried to intimidate Ukraine with one of the largest attacks since the start of the full-scale war, our forces were tearing up the skies. On the night of March 24th, the enemy launched dozens of Shahed-type attack drones. It seemed like a massive strike, chaos, darkness. But what happened is already becoming the trademark style of Ukrainian defenders. A single crew of a Mi-8 helicopter from the Ukrainian Naval forces destroyed 12 enemy drones in 3 hours. This is what jeweler-like precision, cold composure, and absolute professionalism mean in the sky, where every second determines life. And that's not all. In total, during this attack, one of the most massive of the entire war, units of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine destroyed 27 Shahed drones, officially, clearly, and without embellishment. And here's how the military themselves describe it.
A single Mi-8 helicopter crew from the naval forces destroyed 12 Shahed drones in 3 hours. Precisely, quickly, professionally. We are proud of our naval aviators. Together towards victory.
And while our heroes in the sky are literally destroying the enemy in direct combat, Ukraine is already taking another step toward a place where the war becomes even more technological, even more precise, and even more dangerous for the occupiers. Because now, attention, our interceptor drones have received a remote brain. For the first time in Ukraine, a remote control system for interceptor drones has been used. This means the operator is no longer tied to the battlefield. He can be hundreds of kilometers away from the launch site and still conduct real combat. This was reported by Oleksandr Kamishin, who released a video showing the Ukrainian interceptor drone Letavin destroying a Russian Shahed right during this very massive attack on March 23rd to 24th. And it looks like scenes from the future. The operator is far away, the target is in the sky. The strike is precise, but that's not all. The Ukrainian company Wild Hornets announced the combat use of their own technology. Their interceptors can now be controlled literally from anywhere, even from a hotel. In the released footage, the operator controls a combat drone while being a significant distance from the front line and still destroys the target. This means that now a single crew can control not just 20 kilometers of the front, but up to 100 kilometers. And from now on, our best operators can work even more efficiently. And while Russia launches waves of drones, Ukraine responds not only with force, but with intelligence, technology, and a future that has already arrived. And while Ukraine is already learning to control drones at distances of hundreds of kilometers, Another piece of news emerges that sounds like a true technological breakthrough. Because now we are not just intercepting, we are creating hunters for Shaheds. A new unique interceptor drone, the Jedi Shahed Hunter, has been launched into production in Ukraine. And this is not just a drone. This is speed, automation, and precision that are changing the rules of the game right now. According to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, this drone has truly impressive characteristics: vertical takeoff, a weight of only 4 kilograms, a speed of over 350 kilometers per hour, and a flight altitude of up to 6 kilometers. And most importantly, it can see its target both day and night. Equipped with both day and thermal imaging cameras, the Jedi operates 24/7 without breaks, leaving the enemy no chance. But the most interesting thing is how it hunts. The drone receives data from radars automatically. In other words, it doesn't just fly, it immediately knows where the enemy is. It quickly enters the target zone, locks on, and destroys it. Essentially, it's an automatic hunter in the sky. Coordination is provided by a ground station, but the interceptor itself can independently home in on the target. And this means one thing: its response is instantaneous and its strike is precise. Let us recall that in January 2026, Mikhailo Fedorov entered the Ministry of Defense not just as an official, but as a crisis manager with a clear diagnosis for the system. His first step was the declaration of the mathematics of war, a complete rejection of paper reports and a transition to management based on real data from the Delta system and electronic point systems. Then he set a goal that shocked the staff generals: 50,000 verified enemy losses per month, proving that war is above all about management and precise numbers.
We need the right dialogue, the right synchronization. We need to set the right objectives. A system that lacks them begins to deteriorate. That's why management is the top priority. Management should be built around those who are capable of achieving set goals. If people do not demonstrate measurable results, they cannot remain in the system.
The main problem at the front, give us drones, is becoming a thing of the past. Fedorov is introducing a guaranteed monthly minimum of UAVs for each brigade. FPV, reconnaissance, and strike systems. All of this will now be supplied automatically in addition to centralized procurement. Commanders will finally be able to plan operations, knowing that their resources won't run out tomorrow. And Starlink and pickup trucks will become just as fundamental as ammunition. Fedorov is also introducing a systematic audit of combat losses. Every tragedy on the battlefield will now be analyzed under a microscope to identify systemic mistakes and prevent them from happening again.
The Ministry of Defense is launching a systematic analysis of every loss on the battlefield to identify recurring problems and make management decisions. We will fight for the life of every soldier.
There's more to come. 2026 will be the year of ground robots. Fedorov has set the task of increasing the number of UGVs several times over. Priority: to remove people from dangerous logistics routes and engineering tasks. Where a soldier used to be at risk, now a robot will do the job. This is true transformation. Iron and code should do the fighting, while our people manage the process from safe shelters.
This year, there will be many times more ground robotic systems. The goal is to shift logistics to robotic systems in order to reduce personnel losses.
Incredible events are happening at the front. Ukrainian drones continue to change the course of battles. Moscow has declared a day of mourning. Serious losses of defense systems have been recorded in Crimea. The peninsula's air shield has been destroyed, and our forces are clearing the way for further operations. It appears that a deep strike by the Ukrainian Defense Forces has delivered a powerful blow to the enemy's logistics, causing chaos in the occupiers' rear lines. These are just the first steps before a possible large-scale offensive. See the details of the event next.
Another analog-less wonder. A Ka-52 helicopter was destroyed by a Ukrainian drone. The successful attack took place in the Pokrovsk direction. The crew of the Alligator went to a concert for Kobzon. On the night of March 19th, Ukrainian drones delivered a devastating strike on the temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula. The target was a plant for the production and repair of air defense systems.
In occupied Sevastopol, a strike by several drones critically damaged the innovative center of the Granite enterprise, which is part of the Almazanti concern. This facility repaired and serviced S-400 Triumph and S-300 PM2 favorite anti-aircraft missile systems, 92 N6E and 96 L6E radar stations, as well as medium and short-range air defense systems, Bukom 2M3 and Torum 2.
2 days before this strike, the Ukrainian General Staff reported a hit on the Aviastar aircraft repair plant in the Ulyanovsk region. Shelters and aircraft parking areas were damaged. Some of the aircraft were also damaged. And likewise, there was a strike on the 123rd aircraft repair plant in the village of Staraya Russa, Novgorod region. A hangar for servicing Il-76 and Il-410 aircraft was hit. Satellite images confirmed the damage to the plants.
The enterprise engaged in the production of Il-76s, and another enterprise involved in the repair of similar aviation equipment have been seriously hit. What does this tell us? It means that the component involving transport aircraft, refuelers and other equipment based on the Il-76, like the Ruslan, is now in serious doubt.
Strikes on the aggressor's military-industrial complex have already become systematic. With their middle and deep strikes, the armed forces of Ukraine are creating increasingly serious problems for Russia at the tactical, operational and strategic levels.
Ukrainian forces are systematically working to weaken Russian air defense and identify other valuable targets in Russia's rear as part of their air interdiction campaign at medium and long ranges.
It is such a common routine element of the ongoing conflict we see today. Aviation facilities, along with various other critical military-industrial complex factories of the Russian Federation, at least those specifically located within the Western European territories of Russia, are generally becoming a frequent and increasingly common target, a regular and recurring object of unmanned aerial vehicle and drone strikes.
The American Institute for the Study of War notes that Ukrainian drone units have changed their tactics and targets for strikes since the beginning of 2026.
Ukrainian drone units are now placing a significantly higher priority on and effectively carrying out successful strikes against Russian artillery, specialized drone operators and various logistical targets located within the near-rear areas to achieve important tactical results. On March 17th, the head of planning for a Ukrainian drone battalion operating in the Lyman direction reported that Ukrainian forces have redirected their drone strikes, prioritizing Russian artillery, drone operators, ground communication lines, and strongholds rather than Russian infantry. This reduces the number of Russian attacks and allows Ukrainian forces to achieve local successes.
Since November 2025, the number of monthly medium-range strikes by Ukrainian forces at distances from 50 to 250 kilometers from the front line has quadrupled.
Every single successful strike carried out against any target that affects or directly impacts the complex logistics networks of the Russian Federation inevitably means that fewer and fewer various types of weaponry and equipment will be delivered, returned for repair, or newly supplied to the Russian army's front lines. And this development, in turn, will ultimately result in a significant weakening of their overall air defense systems.
A change in the strategy of drone strikes essentially means that the initiative is shifting into the hands of the Ukrainian army. This was even indirectly confirmed by the Secretary of Russia's Security Council and former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who recently stated that there are virtually no safe regions left on Russian territory.
Ukraine is demonstrating new capabilities in the field of missile weaponry. The S-400 has been detected under surveillance as Ukraine's defense forces are strengthening control over the airspace. The FP-7 is no longer detecting warning signals and mobile units are ready for action. The armed forces of Ukraine are openly declaring potential enemy targets that may not withstand new strikes. This is the first time that specific weak points in Russian defenses have been publicly named, and the subsequent actions of Ukrainian forces are being watched with great attention. All this and more coming up next.
The domestic defense industry has prepared a powerful response to the Russian occupiers, the FP-7 ballistic missile. The strike radius of this weapon can reach several hundred kilometers and will depend on its configuration.
The range for hitting a target is about 300 kilometers. The warhead weighs about 150 kilograms. The maximum speed is 1,500 meters per second. The flight time is about 250 seconds, which means its average speed is approximately 800 meters per second. The FP-7 is called a copy of the Russian missile for the S-400 surface-to-air missile system.
The Ukrainian ballistic missile FP-7 is referred to as an analog of the American ATACMS missile.
Its target engagement range makes it an analog of the American ATACMS. The ATACMS has a similar engagement range of about 300 kilometers.
However, the FP-7 is several times cheaper.
The price is 2.5 times lower than even the simplest ATACMS. The range is the same, 300 kilometers, depending on the warhead weight. Well, it's probably not as compact as the ATACMS because it's a clone of an air defense missile.
According to Stielerman, the chief designer and co-founder of Firepoint, the high price of ballistic missiles is due in part to the bureaucratic burden placed on militech companies. However, the Ukrainian authorities have eased this burden for domestic manufacturers by allowing ballistics to be coded as UAVs. The basic version of the Ukrainian FP-7 ballistic missile has successfully passed all stages of testing.
It's a clone of the S-400 missile, a Soviet missile. Based on this missile, we made a short-range ballistic missile with a range of up to 300 kilometers. You saw its tests, there was a flight. Now we are moving on to testing it on our dear neighbors.
According to Steilerman, the company manufactures almost all the components for the missile, from engines to flight controllers. The exception is the warhead, which is produced to order.
The FP-7 is an entirely homegrown and exclusively Ukrainian-developed product. Consequently, the Ukrainian side does not need to seek any formal authorization or permission to utilize its own long-range strike assets to hit military targets located deep within the territory of the Russian Federation. This stands in stark contrast to the restrictions faced previously, as was the case, for example, when using the French-supplied Scalp missiles, or the British-made Storm Shadow systems, or even the advanced ATACMS produced by the United States.
The missiles are planned to be launched from mobile launchers disguised as ordinary trucks, making them difficult to detect. Deploying the system can take about 15 minutes.
Just to clarify, that's 300 kilometers. The recent strikes by the Ukrainian side on a stationary target, specifically the Kremny EL plant in Bryansk, have clearly demonstrated that there are more than enough legitimate targets, namely defense industry enterprises and air bases of the Russian aerospace forces, primarily on the territory of the Russian Federation itself. It should be noted that within the strike range of the FP-7 are also the air bases used by the attack aviation of the occupying country's armed forces. These include the Milerovo Air Base and the Baltimore Air Base.
But that's not all. Military expert Dmytro Snihirov also names other legitimate targets for strikes on Russian territory.
Accordingly, legitimate military targets are stationary facilities, enterprises of the military-industrial complex, the energy sector, and logistics supply bases of the Russian army. One of the largest oil refineries will also fall within the strike zone. This refers to the Novoshakhtinsk refinery, which is exclusively affiliated with meeting the logistical needs of the occupying country's army.
In parallel with preparations for the serial launches of the FP-7, Ukrainian engineers are actively working on its older sister, the FP-9 missile, which will have a much greater range. The FP-9 will have a longer range and will be able to strike at a distance of 800 kilometers. The first tests of this long-range modification are scheduled for the beginning of the summer season. The company already has all the necessary resources to move on to the practical phase of testing.
A city like Moscow can only be effectively reached with ballistic missiles. And there are a lot, as you correctly said, indeed, there are a lot of military enterprises and many targets that need to be destroyed. That's why we're making the FP-9.
Total shock. Ukraine defeated NATO in half a day. A triumphant victory for our forces at sea. Magura burst in like thunder out of a clear sky. What a surprise. The West doesn't know how to fight. Foreign soldiers have never even seen such weapons. Ukrainian naval drones achieved the incredible. The alliance was not prepared for this. Magura fights with lightning speed. There are no equals. The first details are in the following report.
NATO troops have once again been defeated by the Ukrainians.
When they say that Ukraine doesn't meet NATO standards, I think it's already surpassed NATO standards a bit.
The North Atlantic Alliance has once again invited Ukraine to participate in exercises, probably to take revenge for the crushing defeat at the NDHOG exercises in Estonia. They took place last year and their results shocked Western generals. Back then, a Ukrainian team of just 10 fighters simulated the destruction of 17 armored vehicles in half a day and carried out about 30 strikes on other targets. In a real battle, the alliance's troops would have simply been wiped out. And now NATO generals have dared to tempt fate a second time. However, this time not on land. They proposed a theoretically win-win option for themselves.
Let's play at sea this time. Alright, our Cossacks said, took our Chaikas and set sail for Portugal. 5-0. We sank everything they put out. Well, it was a simulation. Obviously, they worked with those ships without any explosives.
Ukraine was on the red team. In fact, it was leading it. The Ukrainian team also included units from the USA, the United Kingdom, Spain, and other countries. They faced off against the blue team, which included other NATO forces. There were 5 training scenarios. They practiced port defense, escorting maritime convoys and attacking those convoys. The Ukrainians brought Magura sea drones to the exercise, including several versions of these unmanned vehicles. One of them was equipped with reconnaissance equipment and an explosive charge, while another had a machine gun. At this point, the enemy could have already raised the white flag, considering that Russian ships literally fled the Black Sea because of these very Magura drones. But that's not all. These sea drones are dangerous even for aircraft. NATO forces tried to fight back but lost a frigate. Or rather, they would have lost it if it had been a real battle. According to journalists, during the simulated attack, the red team scored so many hits on the NATO frigate that in a real battle it would have sunk. 5 minutes later, the blue team, still unaware of the situation, asked in the general chat, "So are you going to attack us or not?" The blue team couldn't even detect the weapons the red team used to strike them. As a result, the team led by Ukraine defeated the NATO forces with a clean sweep, 5-0.
Such a victory is not a coincidence, nor is it some kind of extraordinary approach. It is a natural outcome. NATO countries are used to a peaceful period of military development, specifically in military training. Large, broad platforms are used where important, long-term, large-scale decisions are made. But life has shown that, the use of the so-called Mosquito fleet, as in Ukraine, and the use of small assets by small forces, this can be a major complication for those large traditional fleets that exist.
This is exactly what the Ukrainians have clearly demonstrated. A traditional fleet would have simply been destroyed. And in fact, that's exactly what happened to the Russian fleet. The purpose of such exercises is precisely to point out NATO's weaknesses and give them a chance to be prepared if, or rather, when, Russia decides to launch new aggression.
Ukraine is not just, a recipient of aid. Right now, it is a driver of security in Europe. And in this way, by showing our partners what we do and how we do it, they see their own mistakes, their own shortcomings, and accordingly strengthen their capabilities, their abilities. And this overall strengthens the pan-European context. Ukraine is an integral part of Europe's security here.
But after the second crushing victory over NATO forces, one involuntarily wonders, why does Ukraine want so much to join the alliance? Ukrainians are clearly stronger now, and on the contrary, it is the North Atlantic Alliance that should want Ukraine to join them. In fact, both sides will benefit.
For Ukraine, it's clear to become part of the common security system when there's no need to come up with some kind of guarantees for Ukraine that might exist in the future, but it's unknown how they will actually work. NATO already has established protocols and a system, and when we join this common system, we become part of it from within, not on the edge, not on the side, not somehow separate, but inside this system, which itself is already designed to protect us. That's why this is necessary both for Ukraine and for NATO, especially since they are now using Ukrainian experience. Actually, the Ukrainian experience of conducting warfare at sea is very important.
But ultimately, it is politicians who make the decisions, and the United States itself has stated directly, Ukraine's accession to NATO is impossible in the near future. But here's a curious detail. During the exercises, the US units were on the side of the Ukrainians. Coincidence or fear of being outmaneuvered? Well, that's all from me for now. What do you think about these events? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come. Stay informed about the main news and don't forget to like the video. Wishing you peaceful skies above!